Alright, this video is going to be on lowering systems. A few different um, descent control devices that we have for lowering. We have the figure 8, and then we have two types of brake bar rack. We have a closed type of rack, which is a steel U-frame and has aluminum bars on it. And we have an open style rack, which is a steel frame with steel bars on it. Some pros and cons to each, which we'll talk about. The aluminum figure 8 is very easy to use, very quick to set up, and very cheap, and you can rappel very fast with it. Some disadvantages of it are you only have a set amount of friction. Once you begin your rappel or you lower, there's no way to adjust the friction on it. So it's pretty much limited to a one-person load. It's not very good for pickoffs, and it's not good for rappels over about 100-150 feet because it doesn't disperse heat very well. So it has a tendency to heat up, and then if you stop and tie off, you can actually damage the rope from the heat that it builds up. It does come in handy sometimes with low angle rescues where we have a very light load, and sometimes the rack provides too much friction. The brake bar rack, either style, gives us a lot more adjustability with our friction. We can pretty much adjust the friction to wherever we want it, even while the rack is loaded. Two different styles, the closed rack and the open rack. The closed rack is a little bit stronger frame. They're both good for a two-person load, but the closed rack is a little bit stronger. The closed racks that we have aluminum bars in them. Some pros and cons again to that. Aluminum provides more friction than steel, but it doesn't disperse heat as well. Steel, on the other hand, provides less friction, but it does disperse heat a lot better. So for longer rappels, steel tends to disperse the heat better for us. Again, both of them will work for a two-person load, just two different styles, and we'll go over operation of both of them. We'll talk first about lowering systems, and then in another video at another time we'll go into rappelling. Some advantages and disadvantages of each. With lowering, it allows the rescuer to have both hands free. If you have an unsupported victim where the rescuer is going to have to attach a harness to him, and there's potential that that victim could lunge at the rescuer, lowering system is generally going to be the better option. If he's trying to rappel down to him and the victim lunges at him, he may lose control of his descent control device. So in that case, lowering that rescuer into place could be a better option. Rappelling, on the other hand, is typically going to be faster, and it gives the rescuer more control. Lowering-based rescue requires a lot more coordination and communication between the rescuer and the rigging team. Start out with the figure 8. Again, it's very easy to load. You take your rope, and the knot will be the load end. That'll go to our rescuer. You just form a bight in the rope, come up through the big hole, around the neck, and then clip it into your anchor point. Alright, and that's it. Alright, so this will be the load. Alright, and then it's just as simple as that. Again, it's not variable friction. The only way I can change the amount of friction on this is with the amount of pressure that I use with my hand. The harder I squeeze it, the more friction I apply. It's the only way I can change that. Anytime that we're working with a moving rope, whether we're rappelling, lowering, or operating a belay, we should have gloves on. Just for the sake of demonstration, to make it easier to see what I'm doing, I'm not wearing gloves for this. Alright, tying off the rack. I'll zoom in so we can see it. Tying off the figure 8. What we're going to do is bring the rope back. We're going to come around both ears on it. Kind of cinch it down so it forms that kink in the rope right there. And then wrap it around the ears a second time. Alright, once we do that, we want to bring a bight up through the hole in the rack. And then we're just going to tie an overhand knot around the main line. And once we do that, it's tied off and it can be hands-free. When you're untying the figure 8, it's very important that you maintain tension on that rope at all times. And never get your hand inside that figure 8 where it could get pinched. Again, you want to maintain tension at all times. Now you can begin your lower again. Next will be closed rack. either style, open or closed. I'm going to start out with the rack already attached to the anchor. Flip that around. Now you see that every other bar has a groove in it. It can actually drop down. The bars in between those are actually fixed. There's no way to drop those out. So we want to start with our main line, come around that top bar. We're going to form a bight in the rope. Bring that next bar up. Clip it in. Pull tight. Slide down. Continue to do the same thing all the way through. Alright, anytime you're starting a lower or a rappel, you always want to start out with all the bars in place. You can always drop them as necessary once you begin to move your load. But you always want to start out with all of them on. Alright, from here, again, I can adjust my friction very easily. There's two ways I can do that. I can do it when I'm operating the rack. I always want to have one hand on the bars, the other hand on the line. If I need to decrease the friction, I can spread out those top two bars, and that's going to allow the load to move a little bit freer. If I still need to decrease the friction even more, I can take that second bar, pinch it down tight, and that'll hold the load in place. I can actually drop one of the bars out of it. Now I've got less friction. We never want to drop more than one bar. Any more than that, and we start to lose control of the amount of friction that we have. Alright, to tie off the rack, again, we're going to add all the bars back in. I'm going to cinch them down tight. And you can see we've got these little tabs on the top of it that helps us tie it and lock it up. We'll come around the top. Again, try to cinch all those bars together. Come up through the frame, form a bight, and tie it overhand. Alright, that's now tied and it's hands free. Alright, untying it. I'm going to untie the knot. Again, once you start to untie it, always maintain a hand on it and keep tension on it. Once I get to this point, I can take my free hand, cinch those bars down tight, and that'll help maintain control of the load. Alright, and then you can begin your lower from there just like we did before. Alright, the last option we have is the open frame rack. Very similar, works by the same principle. One difference with this, at least with this particular rack, is, I don't know if you can see it from there, first difference is all of the bars have slots in them where they can be disconnected. The other difference with this particular rack, hopefully you can see that, is the slot in the bar is actually angled. So when I clip it in, it's actually going to stay in place, versus with the closed frame rack that we have, I flip it upside down, it will actually fall out of place. Alright, so with this, there's really no way to weave it backwards without it pretty much becoming readily apparent. With this particular rack, being that it has those angled slots on the bars, you could actually weave this backwards and it would stay in place until you put your full weight on it. Alright, so with this open face rack, it is absolutely critical that you check and double check to make sure that you have it weaved properly. One benefit to this rack, and a lot of them have this now, is this little training groove on that bar, which tells you which side of that bar the rope should be on. So that kind of helps make it a little bit easier. Again, we already have it attached to our anchor point. With an open frame rack, we want that open side of the rack facing down. That's going to help give us more control, especially if in a rappel. Alright, so again, I'm going to look, see where that little training groove is. Make sure that we weave it properly. Now sometimes with that angled groove, it's kind of tight trying to clip those bars into place. You slide it down towards the open end of the frame. It's more flexible, makes it easier to clip into place. And so you can see where that training groove is, the rope's running across it, so I know I've got it right. Cinch it down, bring the next one in, slide it up, just continue with that same process. Again, we always start out with all the bars in place. We can drop them as necessary if we need to. Alright, basic operation is still the same, although the orientation is going to be a little bit different. We've got the 90-degree offset on the eye on this rack, so it's going to kind of sit sideways instead of flat like the closed rack did. It actually gives us a little bit more control. If I need to drop a bar, again, I want to cinch those up tight. I'm going to drop this one out. Alright, so I've got one less bar, and I can spread them out, change my friction. And here's where I get a little bit more control with an open rack. With a closed rack, I can't really bring the rope over to the other side of that frame. Alright, with an open rack, because it has that open frame, I can actually bring this out, and I'm basically dropping a bar and a half by doing that. If that's a little bit not quite enough friction, I can just bring it back across to this side, and that's going to give it more friction. So it gives me a little more control, a little more versatility than the closed frame style. Tying it off, again, we want to add all the bars back in. We've got that same tab up there like we had on the other rack. We're going to wrap around that, wrap around the frame, make sure we cinch everything tight. Then a couple of things that we could do here, we can either wrap back around a second time and then throw a couple of half hitches around that open leg there. Alright, and that's secure, that's hands-free. Now if the rope you're using is very stiff, sometimes those half hitches are difficult to tie around there. If that's the case, then you can just do the same thing. Wrap it twice around, and just like we did before, come up, form a bite, and tie an overhand around the main line. Alright, that'll accomplish the same thing. It's hands-free now. Again, tying it off, we always want to make sure we maintain control and keep a tight grip on that rope as we're untying it.